Today I am planting cauliflower, and I want to document how I'm going about planting this cauliflower in the garden so that it can have the best possible success to grow and produce well. But first, let's go check out the natural calendar to see when I am planting this crop. When the skirt plants are beginning to leaf out right at the base of the plants, when the lilacs are leafing out this time in spring, and the flower structures are just beginning to bud out. When the bittercress is beginning to transition into more seed pod production, and the flowers are not quite as robust as they were earlier in the season. When some of the dandelions are just beginning to flower. When peach trees are just beginning to bloom. When ground ivy, the plant with the purple flowers, is just beginning to flower. When bittersweet nightshade is just beginning to leaf out. You can see the small leaf buds. So the forsythia has been blooming for about a week or so, and it's beginning to leaf out. The devil's walking stick leaf buds are just beginning to break out into leaf. Alright, so this is where I have two rows of peas planted, and then in between is where I'm going to plant, in that middle row is I'm going to plant that cauliflower. So I'm probably going to plant it about maybe either a foot apart or a foot and a half apart. Maybe I'll do some of each to see what spacing kind of works better in this context. So this is a bed that's a little deeper into the garden. A lot of the prevailing wind comes this direction, so this is a little bit further into the garden, so it gives it a little bit more wind protection because I have some available space in the front of it as well, but that's a lot more subject to harsher wind and less protection from other vegetation that could act as a barrier or a buffer. So maybe my next batch of cauliflower I transplant out here, I will plant out in the front, as the windier conditions by that point should have died down a bit. And meanwhile, I'll plant the first batch in here. So I dug some holes here, and not too deep, just 4 or 5 inches deep or so, because I have the cauliflower plants in 4-inch pots. And but what I'm going to do before I transplant these cauliflower plants out here is I'm going to add in a little bit of crushed bean seeds. These are seeds that were a few years old that I had. I never got to planting them, so I feel like for some of these this would be a good use for them. Of course, the bean seeds can be a source of nitrogen. They can have some other minerals in there as well. So I'm gonna add some of this in there as like a slow to kind of medium release fertilizer, and I'm gonna use a tablespoon. So it'll look about like that. And then what I'll do is I'll like mix it around with my hand in there. So the soil I am gardening in is getting better each year, but it's still not quite where I want it to be. And so kind of adding in a little bit more organic fertility amendments, preferably ones that are homemade. Also, the brassicas, like cauliflower, don't tend to form as close associations with so many of these microorganisms, not like legumes or grasses or other crops. So some of these effects that fertility amendments can have on on the soil microbiome, it might not necessarily be as dramatic for brassica crops as it is for other crops. But I don't really know, because brassicas aren't as dependent on the different bacteria and fungi, mycorrhizal fungi in the soil to get their nutrients. Alright, so we have the cauliflower plants here, And so we're gonna go ahead and transplant these outside. Hopefully they're not too root bound at this point. Little good soil structure. It was wet in the bottom of the tray, so you can see it kind of. But other than that, we got some good mycelium in here too. Alright, so since those plants, the cauliflower plants that I transplanted out here were a little wet at the base and the base of the roots in the pots, and they seem to have been like a little chronically wet there. So hopefully that's not gonna like damage the cauliflower head production too much. I don't know if it would disrupt the routine of calcium access, but I'm not going to water them in. I'm just going to cover them in with the soil. I have the bean seed fertilizer down underneath that might help to absorb and take in some excess moisture as well. And so I'm just going to cover these. It's pretty cloudy and overcast today, so that's beneficial for planting right now, so they don't have that heat stress or the sun to deal with. So I'm not gonna water them. And the soil, it's been raining for like a week straight. I'm not too worried about the soil drying out or anything like that. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and cover these in. Maybe tomorrow I might consider watering them. I think it's supposed to be a little bit more sunny, so then it might be a good idea. But I think for right now, I don't want to continue to saturate them with moisture. I want to just kind of let it try to even itself out a little bit tonight, and I may not water until later on in the day tomorrow. So these cauliflower plants I had started back in February, and I had started growing them indoors under lights for a couple of months, but now in the beginning of April I am getting ready to plant them out. I don't want to hold them in their pots too long because I don't want them to get root bound, and then that will stunt their growth and limit their ability to produce a yield. So what I did was I covered these cauliflower plants with the soil back around them. And then I did not water them, and then I just added in some grass clippings, right? And so these grass clippings will help add in some nitrogen when they do get watered, and then they have some organic matter to contribute and nutrients and things like that. But they also provide habitat for beneficial insects and beneficial arachnids like spiders or beetles and other insects like that will go after pests. I also planted some golden Alexanders in between a few of these plants. The golden Alexanders was clumping out, and so I chose to separate them out a little bit to give them some of these plants a little bit more space, and so I companion planted them in between the cauliflower. Golden Alexanders, of course, is a native plant. They are an umbelliferous plant, so they produce those umbels of florets, and those attract all kinds of beneficial insects. So maybe later today I'll water them in. Last night I did apply a solution of rhubarb stalks and parsnip leaves and roots that I had soaked in water and stuff as like a herbivore deterrent on the cabbage plants. So far so good. Doesn't seem like a single one has been touched. So thank you so much for checking out this video on planting or transplanting cauliflower into the garden. I look forward to hopefully providing an update video on how the cauliflower is doing and what kinds of heads or curds, as the cauliflower heads are technically called, of what they produce, the size of those heads, the health and vigor in which the plants produce them, and and maybe different ways to cook with them. So I appreciate you checking out this video, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Take care.